Continuing my tutorial on the Vega interior, I'm actually going to start in Gimp here because I'm still working on the textures. I've got an actual photo of the door panel, or the right door panel, and I have to remove the background here and then change the color to the correct interior color. So this is more of a tutorial about photo editors and Gimp and so on. Doesn't necessarily have to be just for games editing. So I use the free select tool, as you can see here, and the idea is I select the door as precisely as possible, and then I invert the selection so that I can delete the background. And notice earlier I set up an alpha channel just to make sure that the background would be transparent if nothing were there, because oftentimes with these images that you find, there's no alpha channel, and so if you remove the background, all it does is turn it to white, which of course is not really the same thing as completely removing it. So, moving around the edge here, we then complete it. There it is. Zoom out, invert the selection, and then clear. It's as simple as that. And there's the background is gone. And next step will be to separate out that wood panel there, or the fake wood panel more likely, from the rest of the door, because that will remain the same color in the final version. So I have to create a new layer. I have to copy the existing image, and so select all, copy, paste, and there the new copy of it is exactly on top of the old version of it. And now I have to select the wood and then invert the selection and do the same thing as before. But in order to see what I'm doing, I'm going to have to first anchor this layer, obviously. But also I'm going to have to get rid of the visibility of the original image so that it looks as if it's not there. And then I'm only going to work on the upper layer with the new version of it, and then of course, the two will go together later, although not in the XEF file. I'll only merge them in the final texture. So I select the panel with the free select tool, same as before, and so this will have to be a little bit more precise because it's not as straight edged a shape as it at first appears to be. So invert the selection, clear, of course, and there it is. It's separate. So now I can work on the underlying layer freely without destroying my wood panel. So I just cut it out in order to paste it back in. The reason is it's easier to move if you do it this way. At first it doesn't seem to make any sense, but it makes sense if you're familiar with Gimp. So I first have to change that background image to black and white so that I can change the color freely. That's just a little trick. Not everybody does that, but I find it's easier if you do it this way. Then of course you switch it back to color before you put in the colors. And I paste in the wood panel again, which will remain completely color, its original color. And then I have to inch it into place. So again, I have to cut it out and then paste it back in with a different opacity so that it's easier to line up. Actually, this also had to be done because if I had not cut and removed it earlier, it would have gone to black and white when I changed the whole image to black and white. As far as I know, you can't change a layer to black and white in Gimp. I could be wrong about that. So anyway, opacity is back to normal. And there we have it, a gray door, which is not what I'm going to settle for because my interior, at least at first, is going to be tan. And so if you notice behind this, I have the interior texture XEF file. So we'll see what I'm going to do with that in a minute. But first of all, I should add that the easiest way to change the color of something in Gimp is generally with the hue tool. The problem is if you're starting with a black and white image, it doesn't have any effect. You see that? I'm sliding it and the preview isn't giving me anything. So that means that I have to get more elaborate here by using the levels tool. You see. Levels to and the hue and saturation panel. So if I give you an example of how this works, if I up the red level on that black and white image, I can turn it sort of a pinkish, coralish color. And that wouldn't be a bad interior color for a hot rod, but I'm not actually going to do that, of course. So I go to this texture file, as I mentioned earlier, and I select the color that I want with the eyedropper tool. And then it gives me my levels, you see, and these levels can be plugged into the hue and saturation tool as well as into the RGB channels on the levels. But because you can't easily jump between projects in Gimp without closing that window, I've made a note of these levels in Notepad there. And so now we go back to the project, go to the levels. This is a little bit of a disorderly way of doing it, but figure HSV RGB. That's the order of those figures. So the value, then I jump to, first of all, I checked it for a preview. Hue and saturation. And then I jump back to their RGB channels and plug those in. And as you'll see, actually, it doesn't give me a perfect match because it doesn't take into account brightness, which is not included generally when you use the eyedropper tool. There's probably a way to do that, but the other thing about using photographs is that it's not the same thing as a bitmap image, which is done in the traditional 1980s way. It's not ideal at all. So anyway, there is in theory, the correct color, but as you can see, it's not in practice. It's too light, actually. So I look at the lightness tool, and I make it darker. But eventually, I have to go back to the texture file and get a proper comparison, using it as a swatch. You see that? So it's still, my new door panel is still too light, so I make it darker. That's not really dark enough, so I make it even darker. I make it even darker than that. That's pretty close, actually. So I settle on that, and that will go into that texture file after I finish with it. But as you'll see, I have to do a little bit more detailing. And in the meantime, I save it as an XCF file because I have to preserve the levels while I work on it. And generally, it's good to back your stuff up this way anyway, especially if you want to do additional colors, which I probably will. So I am not going to just discard this after I've copied and pasted it.